Today I'm going to be discussing some of my all-time favorite books. You can check the description for the books that I will be discussing. Please be warned that 1, this video does contain spoilers, and 2, it does contain discussion of sensitive subjects such as suicide, murder, and mental illness. The Goodreads description for Clockwork Orange describes it as an influential nightmare vision of the future in which criminals take over after dark. Teen gang leader Alex narrates in a fantastically inventive slang that echoes the violent intensity of youth rebelling against society. Dazzling and transgressive, A Clockwork Orange is a frightening fable about good and evil and the meaning of human freedom. This book is easily my all-time favorite. I want to be clear that this is the international version, in which there's an extra chapter at the end. In the final chapter, Alex runs into one of his old droogs in a cafe, who now acts, looks, and speaks completely normal, and has a partner with a baby on the way and a job. This inspires Alex to turn his life around and leave his criminal behavior behind him. I really don't understand why this chapter is seen as controversial, especially to an American audience that tends to favor good endings. The movie adaptation of this book is easily one of my all-time favorite movies. However, unfortunately, the movie was based on the American version of the book, in which Alex chooses to return to his life of crime in the end. In the movie, Alex has formed a new gang, unfazed by his experience earlier, in which he undergoes psychological torture, essentially, to make him no longer a criminal. This movie is definitely one of the best in the genre of clinically insane protagonist or main character, and is one of my favorites in that genre, which honestly I'm just obsessed with those kinds of movies in general. The second book I want to discuss is Mindhunter. This book essentially explains how serial killers are profiled and covers a case or two in each chapter. So the Goodreads description for this book is as follows. He has hunted some of the most notorious and sadistic criminals of our time, such as the Trailside Killer in San Francisco and the Atlanta child murderer. He has confronted, interviewed, and researched dozens of serial killers and assassins, including Charles Manson, Richard Speck, John Wayne Gacy, and James Earl Ray, for a landmark study to understand their motives, to get inside their minds. He is Special Agent John Douglas, the model for law enforcement legend Jack Crawford, and Thomas Harris's thrillers Red Dragon and The Silence of the Lambs, the man who ushered in a new age in behavioral science and criminal profiling. I'm a criminology minor. I wish I just majored in it. I know, rip. Anyways, I have always been interested in how serial killers are profiled, and this book explains it pretty well, explains the history of behavioral science and the FBI, and I don't know, if you're interested in true crime, I definitely give this a read. It was excellent. I also picked it up from literally the cutest bookshop in all of New York City. I will insert some photos here. The next book that I want to discuss is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I personally didn't like the description of it on Goodreads, so I will try to explain it the best I can. Basically, you have your main character who comes to a small liberal arts college on the East Coast, befriends a handful of other students in his Latin class over the course of a semester, and then at the end of the semester he learns that they killed someone, maybe accidentally, while trying to perform a spiritual ritual. So this is a really interesting part in the book because the narrator, main character, looks past the past few months at all these little weird things that didn't quite make sense, and then he fills in the gaps with, oh, it was because they were getting ready to perform this ritual, or they did and they had killed someone. So basically one of the main characters is a guy named Bunny, who's one of their classmates. He's not very smart and he's kind of a loudmouth, and the group decides that they have to kill him or he may blab and implicate them in a murder. Around the middle of the book, the group plans and executes the murder of Bunny, which is a very small part of the book for how important it is. And the second half of the book mainly covers how each individual kind of deals with having murdered their friend, and it's just really interesting. The description of the bell jar on Goodreads is, Esther Greenwood is brilliant, beautiful, enormously talented and successful, but slowly going under, maybe for the last time. In her acclaimed and enduring masterwork, Sylvia Plath brilliantly draws the reader into Esther's breakdown with such intensity that her insanity becomes palpably real, even rational, as accessible an experience as going to the movies. A deep penetration into the darkest and most harrowing corners of the human psyche, The Bell Jar is an extraordinary accomplishment and a haunting American classic. I reread this book quite often. Sylvia Plath was a talented poet and unfortunately dealt with depression, which ended in her suicide. This lead character in the book is essentially a self-insert of Plath herself. This book is a hauntingly beautiful yet realistic portrayal of depression that many have connected with. In case you've been living under a rock, the description of this book from Goodreads is, among the seminal texts of the 20th century, 1984 is a rare work that grows more haunting as its futuristic purgatory becomes more real. Published in 1949, the book offers George Orwell's nightmarish vision of a totalitarian, bureaucratic world and one poor stiff's attempt to find individuality. This book is a classic and a wonderful combination of a depressing dystopian piece and a psychological thriller. I've read this book a couple of times and find myself thinking about how malleable we are, how we are constantly changing, and that our personalities, beliefs, values, and thoughts can change so easily and do so often more than we think. Reading this book, I find myself so lost and entranced by the world that Orwell describes that I wish I could know more, although in my opinion he describes it very well. I really appreciate the mundane aspects and description of everyday life in this book as well. In my opinion, it's really a shame that this book has been co-opted by the far right and in general by conservatives, because I am a very liberal person and this is one of my favorites, and when I say it's one of my favorites, I'm a little bit ashamed because I think people will assume that I have crazy conservative beliefs, which I definitely do not. The next book I want to discuss is Looking for Alaska by John Green. So this book follows Miles, a pretty straight-edged, shy, nerdy kid who gets sent off to boarding school. He meets some friends who are more adventurous and outgoing than him and kind of gets adopted by their friend group. So they do like regular teenage stuff together, study and whatnot, but they also do little teenage adventures and pranks and stuff, and he develops a crush on this one girl in their group, Alaska, who I will say is kind of a manic pixie dream girl, but she definitely makes him or helps him become more worldly and grown up. About halfway through this book, Alaska dies, and it's kind of unsure whether she, one, premeditated this incident, like she was already suicidal and planned on killing herself, or two, if she was suicidal and at that moment she decided to end her own life, or three, her death was a complete accident. So the remaining friends have to essentially grapple with that. Was it intentional? Was it planned out? Was it an accident? And also grapple with the fact that their friend is dead. And it's pretty heavy stuff for a YA novel, and it's also very real, which is really what I liked about this book. I've reread this book several times over the last decade that it's been in my life, and personally I've never come to a strong opinion on Alaska's death. Personally, I lean towards she was already suicidal, and the fact that she missed her mother's death anniversary and the fact that she had been drinking kind of messed with her enough to essentially aid her in committing suicide. That's my personal opinion, don't at me. But this is one of my favorite books because I feel like it deals with some really grown-up stuff in a way that I really related to as a teenager and can still look back on as a young adult and enjoy. And I still, to this day, am haunted by the situation in which Alaska died in. It's very interesting, and something that also annoyed me is John Green has been very mysterious about his intentions and his personal opinion. He said he left it ambiguous on purpose and that he doesn't have a strong opinion, but even if he left it ambiguous on purpose, I'm sure he does have an opinion, and I'd love to hear it. The last book I will be discussing is Fahrenheit 451. So the synopsis on Goodreads is as follows. Guy Montague is a fireman. His job is to destroy the world's most illegal of commodities, the printed book, along with the houses in which they are hidden. Montague never questions the destruction and ruins his actions produce, returning each day to his bland life and wife, Mildred, who spends all day with her television family. But when he meets an eccentric young neighbor, Clarice, who introduces him to a past where people didn't live in fear, and to a present where one sees the world through the ideas in books instead of the mindless chatter of television, Montague begins to question everything he has ever known. By now, you can tell that I like grim dystopian books. I don't really have a lot to say about this book in specific. It's definitely aimed at a younger audience, but I really appreciate it, and I could just reread it a million times. And in general, I like this book for the same reasons I like 1984.